How are you doing, Greg?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start now. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A facilitated by Arts SU. Today, we're going to be speaking to Greg Bunbury. So, Greg, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. My name's Armani Sutherland. I'm a UAL student, and I'm also the former president of the African Caribbean Society. And I'll be interviewing Greg today. So Greg is a graphic designer, creative consultant, and diversity and inclusion consultant, an illustrator. He graduated with a BA Hons in design studies at London Metropolitan University. And he's most known recently for his outdoor project covering the Black Outdoor Art Initiative. And he's going to speak to us today about some of these things. So Greg, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
No problem. So I just first wanted to start with a question about your route into graphic design and your kind of progression into the creative sector.
Yeah, that'll be great. So essentially, my entry into the creative sector and design was primarily informed by cultural drivers. So I'm going to share my screen for a second. Just give me 1 minute.
No problem.
Okay, so can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to start with this quote, which is the purpose of all we make, whether big or small, strategic or aesthetic, is to change detrimental value systems that affect everyone's well-being. That's by an academic called Dory Tunstall. And I think it's a good route into how I got involved in this kind of work and the process by which other people can bring it into their own careers. So the start of my journey is what I like to call discovery. Essentially, my discovery was informed by where I grew up and how I grew up. I grew up in Hackney in East London. And one of the earliest instances where I remember being exposed to art or design was simply from the world around me. So next to my primary school, there was this mural called The Island, and it was created by a collective called Freeform Arts. This one was created in 1980. It was part of an initiative from GLC, and it's something that I saw every day, sometimes multiple times a day. On my way to school and back, I had no idea what art or design was. I had no idea what public art meant, but I knew this was about the community and it was for the community. And the same for another mural, which was up the road from me. This is the Happy Peace mural, which was painted in 1985. Now, this work reflected the community as I understood it. And so therefore, the connection between public art and a kind of activism around creating the world we want to see is something that stayed with me and just kind of followed me throughout my career and personified by the Black Outdoor Art Project. So around this time, I got, as a young kid, I was very into street culture. So early hip hop, graffiti, breakdancing, all of this stuff really informed my cultural sensibilities. And this is important because as design activists, we need to find our passion. So we need to discover the things that move us, the things that we connect with, because then that's our pathway to advocacy by seeing the world around us. Now, even though I'm talking about design activism from a point of view of visuals and graphics, there are many other systems at play in terms of activism, from service design and organization. So this was my pathway into it, but this was crystallized in my love for the group Public Enemy in the 80s. Their stance, which was political and social, was the first interaction I had with what was a movement. And the symbology and the power of the logo, which was designed by the band leader, Chuck D, was the first time that I engaged or interacted with a logo. I had no idea what a logo was, but I understood this implicitly as something symbolic that represented a cause. This was mission-led. And I must have drawn this logo maybe thousands and thousands of times over school bags and notebooks and whatnot. Now, being that I'm a child of Caribbean parents, arts and design is not really a pathway that traditionally Caribbean families would encourage their children into, because they're kind of used to thinking of things in terms of practicality and survival as opposed to artistic or philosophical. So if I wanted to be an artist after a school career session, I found out what graphic design was. Now, this is before the internet, so this is before the design language we understand today. So my design language, as it evolved through school and got to university, was again the world around me. So things like rave flyers, the Face magazine, music, art, culture. This is where I kind of drew all of my inspiration and all of my work from. So at this point, I saw graphic design as commercial art. And I figured that it was enough of a commercial basis that it would kind of make my parents happy, but I would somehow be able to survive. And this dichotomy between personal causes, mission-led work, and commercial work, and just being able to pay the bills is something that would stay with me my whole career, and what many designers and agencies and very established companies still struggle with today. So to sum up my kind of discovery phase, essentially, it's to get inspired, explore your passions, and find your tribe. And by that, I mean, identify the things that you care about, identify the things that move you. At this point, I'd already identified that culture and the world around me in my area was a huge pull on me. And later on, it became vital into sort of informing my work from there.
Okay, great. No, really informative. And I can definitely attest to the Caribbean parents not really going for the creative route. And you spoke a lot about your influences, but I was just wondering about some of the challenges that you may have faced or still do face throughout your journey.
Yeah, so essentially, in terms of representation, so after I came out of university, I just assumed I would walk into a 30 grand design job at the Face. And it turns out they weren't handing those out at the door, and other people wanted to work there too. So that didn't work for me. So from there, it was a long period of struggle where I hadn't really appreciated the levels of representation that I would be facing. So by this point, I've experienced actual racism in my life and with my family and the area that I've grown up in. I'm only, I think, a year younger than Stephen Lawrence was when he was murdered. So all of these things are at play, and we're seeing all these things around us, but we're not kind of connecting the dots in terms of, you know, what's going to happen when we leave university. University didn't prepare me for a pathway into work. They essentially, on our final day, just went, I mean, this is a long time ago, so hopefully it's much better now, but they essentially kind of let us out, and they didn't teach us how to prepare a portfolio. They didn't teach us about networking. They didn't tell us how to create opportunities or social entrepreneurship, design entrepreneurship. So I had to go out and basically figure it out. And what the first thing I noticed was that no one in any of the companies I wanted to work for looks like me. I think over maybe a 10 to 15 year period, I was usually the sole Black male in 95% of the companies I worked in. So, I mean, this sends a clear message as to, you know, when your culture is being presented to you as such, now you understand that there's kind of barriers to surmount. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen again. So this phase I call, oh, hang on, that didn't work. So this phase I call looking for trouble. It doesn't want me to do that. So from here, I had to figure out another pathway. So I'm already experiencing roadblocks in terms of representation. Now, because of how our society is structured, especially the way Britain deals about race, there's nothing for me to kind of say this is actually the case. This is why I'm not getting the opportunities I need. But one thing that I'm aware of is that when I'm going in and I'm presenting my work, I'm presenting it as a commodity. I'm going in there and I'm presenting deliverables. I'm presenting, I'm a graphic designer, I'm an art worker, I can make your leaflet, I can make your website, I can make your logo. Now, when you present yourself as a commodity, it's very easy to treat it as such. It's very easy to treat it as a cog in a wheel. Now, if you're battling areas of underrepresentation anyway, by making yourself a commodity, you kind of reduce your appeal or you reduce the impact that you can have. So what I did from there was what I call design entrepreneurship. It's when I go into the community and I just start trying to work. And by doing that, what I'm doing is I'm walking around and I'm trying to solve problems. So from where I used to live, I used to take this walk from my house to the local library. And on the way, I would just try and solve problems. I would redesign somebody's poster or redesign somebody's logo or redesign cinema listings leaflet or anything I could find that I thought I could improve upon. I'd redesign it and I'd actually send it to the client. Now, 9 times out of 10, I would get a stony silence, but maybe 1 out of 10 that would actually turn into work. And by doing that, what it did was it helped me build up a skill set and it helped me build up my abilities and be able to artwork very quickly, be able to think on my feet very quickly. And this kind of, once that bit was covered and I can kind of go, right, this is what I can do. Now I'm looking around and just looking to see, how can I be useful? How can I be useful? And this is the point where I kind of start to elevate my work a little. This goes all the way through to, I end up landing a job at a marketing agency and I start as a graphic designer. And one of the first, or one of the early jobs I get tasked with is a reading initiative for the London Borough of Hackney, where I'm from. At this point, Hackney had the lowest rates of literacy in the country, and the Learning Trust was the body that was appointed to handle all of Hackney's education as a borough. So I put my hand up for the work. I worked my tail off. I pitched. I came up with this brand, this logo, this idea. We presented against much larger agencies and ended up winning the project. And it was a huge moment for me because suddenly it connected what I did with where I was from. And suddenly that connection between the social and the kind of work that I had now kind of schooled myself in doing suddenly became this reality. And then I was kind of like, wow, this has now turned into a 3-year program. And I can see the benefit and I can see how it interacts with communities. And I can see how it's touched all of these lives, all the PCT companies, all the schools within the borough, and all of these huge program events, which I got to design everything for. Now I can kind of really get a sense of the impact. And what I found was later on, when I ended up working in other industries like entertainment and sport, everybody would always come back to this project years and years later. And I think the reason, or well, I know the reason, is because of the meaning. The whole point of activism is to bring our values into our career. And we have to find pathways to try and achieve that in a way that not only is it about kind of doing good work, but it's about doing better work in terms of the companies we work for, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of making structural changes within teams and the way agencies are run. This work then turned into more social work. to the point where the agency then launched its own social division. So it goes to kind of show the viability of socially conscious design as a revenue stream, as a way to, you know, actually make money. I'll tell you what, I'll come out of that and jump back into this for a sec. So yeah, from here, now I have a split between doing work which I considered personal work, and then doing work that I would consider, we always used to call it bread and butter work. And there was always a separation between it. And this is how we were taught. So I would go on these portfolio reviews with these guys at these ginormous agencies, and they would say to me, okay, this is how you present your portfolio. You put all your commercial work at the top, you put all the big brands at the top, and all the personal stuff goes at the back. And then you present all of the really big, sexy work. And at the end of the interview, you say, hey, these are some things that I'm interested in. These are my hobbies, and all the rest of it. What I learned, what took me a long time to learn, is that's the thing that's holding you back. Because the more you present your work as a commodity, the easier it is for people to either undercut you or to find someone cheaper. Or, you know, maybe they just don't like the way you are and they get someone else, because ultimately it doesn't matter. The thing that makes you unique is your perspective. And this is the biggest value you have as an artist, a creative, or a designer. And throughout when I speak, I'm using the terms artist and designer kind of interchangeably. Essentially, we're talking about people engaged in kind of creative activity where the result is either commercial or artistic, but for the benefit of society or our communities. So essentially, my generation, or I guess the people who are kind of close to my age, kind of had it backwards, because the thing we were doing was we were actually reducing our value and making it harder for us to surmount the issues of representation that were around us. Because I mean, even at this point, I'm at agencies where, you know, I'm seeing overt racism, like you know, the kind of stuff that you couldn't really imagine. I remember one instance where there was a large agency that I was working for, very big global agency, and one of the account directors was stood near the printer making a racist joke. And it's quite shocking to kind of, this is in the middle of an open plan office. You know, it's quite shocking to entertain, but essentially, when you're, the position that I was in, being that I was in a position of need, as in I need this job, and this goes back to the dichotomy I mentioned earlier between this activist and personal work and needing work just to pay bills. Because I was in a position of need, now suddenly I'm in a position where, you know, I don't know what to do or where to turn, because, you know, essentially I don't want to lose the job, but at the same time, I have to do something about this, right? So a lot of how I got my start is what I call kind of design entrepreneurship. And design entrepreneurship is essentially looking for opportunities, looking for ways to engage with the kind of clients we want to work with. But at the same time, kind of coming at it with business acumen, so we can get to the point where, you know, we can work on the stuff that really moves us and it be commercially viable. Because if it's not commercially viable, we can't do anything. We can't do any of the work that matters. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to this point.
Oh, wow. What a story. What a journey.
Yeah.
So you touched a bit on your kind of your relationship between art and activism and getting into work for the community and stuff like that. And obviously, most recently, you're known for your Black Outdoor Art Initiative, which can be seen all over the streets of London, on billboards. And I was just wondering, can you elaborate on how the initiative came about and how you would like to see the project grow, and just how you feel it's impacted, because it's kind of everywhere?
Yeah, so the genesis of Black Outdoor Art was as I continued doing more, I guess, kind of advocacy or personal work, I began to kind of look around the industry and how things were and the levels of representation and my experiences. And I kind of started to express that graphically. And one of the tenets of being a design activist is to start small, is to find something where it's a cause that you can be an advocate for, but you can manifest advocacy in a feasible way. So for example, it might not be feasible for me to design a service design process for how a global agency should recruit staff. That might not be feasible. But in terms of making posters, that was something I was doing every day. So then it didn't become such a stretch. It was an easy kind of segue to make. So it all really started with this post that I did around the death of Eric Garner. This happened in 2014. Oh, hang on. Doesn't seem to like me doing that. Try again. So this place in 2014, and I was trying to find ways to take my kind of design entrepreneurship to another level. And it's kind of like, what can I make? What can I do that will impact and benefit the community, that's feasible, that's kind of starting small enough so that, you know, it's something that I can actually do, but then, you know, kind of almost brings my perspective into my work. So I'd been working around kind of typography a lot, and I developed this poster, and I just would post it on social medias. I made it available as a free download. I've never sold it. It's never been used for any sort of commercial gain. And I got a lot of feedback. I got some feedback from some people in the States that were connected with some of the protests around the murder in 2014. And I kind of, it gave me enough momentum to start working on more executions like that. So I kind of started doing stuff around press restriction. And then I developed a series of posters based on Caribbean idioms, based off something that my Guyanese grandmother told me. And I developed a whole series of posters around that. And now suddenly, not only am I making work that is for my community, that kind of connects with it, I'm bringing my own perspective into my work, and it's informing the kinds of clients that I'm getting. But the way I kind of view design activism, or whether you're an artist or consider yourself a designer, is it's like a flag in the ground. When you put yourself out there, like, it has to cost you something. You have to risk something in putting yourself out there. But when you do put yourself out there, you're essentially putting a flag in the ground, and it says, these are my values. Now, if you're a designer or a creative, ideally you want to set your values at the start of your career. You want to decide what it's worth. Dave Chappelle tells a great story about a conversation with his dad where his dad tells him to set his price at the start. So it's kind of setting your values from the start and using those values as a divining rod and using them to kind of inform your decision making. And activism isn't just limited to posters, it's organizational, it's structural. So it might inform the kinds of clients you work with. You might choose to work with clients who have poor representation, or you might choose to work with clients who have a more sustainable print process, that have better ways of distributing things like direct mail. So from here, I call this section picking a fight. So from here, I started working with more and more people, and it opens up my world to different collaborations. And, you know, I essentially find allies. Because I have my flag in my ground, it's now attracting people towards me who share my values and share my perspective on the world. So from here, I enter this partnership with Brotherhood Media, which is an outdoor and ambient experiential media company in London. And we start utilizing billboard space for small one-off projects. This was around Grenfell, and the response was amazing. And it wasn't just amazing in terms of the public connecting with it, amazing from a business perspective as well. And this is another facet that's very important in terms of advocacy or activism work, is that, you know, not to sound too cynical, but it's good business, because companies want to be doing business with companies that align with their values. So in a way, it helps them say who they are and who they want to be aligned with and who they want to work with. So after we did the Grenfell project, and I started just kind of really just doing the same thing that I did at the beginning of my career, where I'm just looking around, trying to solve problems. and we're trying to identify areas where there isn't enough push or kind of need more of a push. And it culminates in the I Can't Breathe poster, which was the week that George Floyd was murdered. And that was a very difficult week because I was kind of at the point where I just kind of saw it as, I just want to tell the truth. I want to tell the truth about the industry I work in, the society I live in, my identity and how I identify as a British person and what that means. And the agency had originally approached me to reprint my poster from 2014. And I didn't feel that was appropriate. I felt that the agency was risking virtue signaling. They're a white-owned agency. So I was very sort of skeptical about why they wanted to do this. And at first I said, no, I just turned them down. Then we met up and we had talk for probably lasted the better part of a day. And we just went back and forth on me just kind of saying, look, why do you want to do this? What does this mean to you? What does this represent? What are we saying about the world that we want to live in? And I had to really feel as though the motives and the drivers for the media company wanting to do it were sound, and they made sense, and they were authentic and truthful.
That was something that was really important to you.
Of course, because this is, you know, when we're talking about something as horrible as a man's murder, and this is the kind of stuff, what I found with the Eric Garner stuff is that it does connect. Because, you know, here I am doing this work from a flat in North London. I had no idea anybody from the States, especially around the campaign, would reach out to me, and they did. So because it's so visible and because it's such a trigger for so many people, and because it means so much to so many people, it was vital that it was coming from an authentic place. And the agency really kind of sold me on their vision for this. So in order to kind of do it justice, rather than reprint the original poster, I made a new poster which then connected the two murders, being that these were the last words that both men said at the time of their murder. So to kind of make that impactful and to kind of tie it in and to kind of show how these conditions persevere. And this was the first one we did. And you know, I was kind of very worried about how the agency would take it and you know, how they would deal with that kind of attention. Because again, it's putting a flag in the ground. And, you know, to their credit, they rose to it and they were like, okay, this is great. You know, we feel good about this. Let's do some more. And from there, my point was, well, it doesn't need to be about me. This should be about the community. Like, even though I'm capable of producing this work and I kind of have a good sense of how the work should work in terms of whether it's provocative, whether it provokes discussion, whether it kind of opens up these discussions, I felt it should come from the community. Black culture is not a monolith. And one of the points of activism is that we have to understand that value systems are dynamic. And we have to allow for those systems to kind of shift and move. And it can't be the case of trying to funnel everything through one perspective. So then I encouraged more work which would display a range of perspectives and a range of views and a range of feelings about the conditions we're in and our situation. So once we start getting other artists involved, like this poster by Harkiran, then we're kind of seeing individual perspectives. But the whole basis for the campaign for me is this is based around empathy. So this is based around understanding. Part of what makes racism so pervasive is its ability to just survive and procreate and persevere. And part of that is, in a sense, marketing. Now, when we think about marketing, we need to stop thinking about marketing as selling. Marketing is connection. It's connecting ideas. It's connecting ideas with people. And that marketing has been used to disenfranchise groups of people and to reduce humanity in groups of people in order for exploitation. So I'm kind of using the same methodology to try to introduce empathy and to try and introduce perspective and understanding and discussion. And sometimes it's provocative and sometimes it does create, sometimes it is a trigger. But we can't progress without empathy, and we can't progress without seeing these images over and over again to counter the images that we've been seeing for 400 years. So, you know, these posters aren't going to change the world. I'm under no illusion that they're going to, but that's not the point. These posters are there to keep these themes and these messages and these ideas in our consciousness, in the public space, in the same way how I was inspired by the murals that I saw as a kid on my way to school. I'm trying to do the same thing for this generation, where we're presenting the world as we want to see it, the world that we want to live in, rather than kind of just reacting to the things around us. This is a vision of, for me, a new British identity that kind of encompasses diversity and equality. So that's what I hope for the campaign. And moving forward, we're kind of building it out, and we want it to be about, we want it to be more about students. We want it to be more about the education sector. We want to get people involved that aren't from the kind of design, arts, or music background as well. Because again, this culture isn't a monolith, and we want to represent those perspectives all the way through.
As in, you didn't necessarily need to have gone and studied graphic design and gone to these universities to have an expression and put your art out there. Yeah.
Of course, all expression is valid. And the point of activism in this sense is to galvanize the community. So it can't be about this kind of gatekeeping of culture. It has to be a conversation, it has to be a dialogue. It has to come from all sections of the community. It's just that designers and artists are so used to producing this work on a commercial basis that it lends itself quite well when we take the commercial aspect out of it. And, you know, what I kind of say to the artist is, you know, what do you want to say? Like, what can you not say on any other campaign, on any other advertising campaign for any other client? Like, you know, this is, I mean, it's fairly unprecedented. There are other outdoor art initiatives around Black culture, but I can't think of anything where the artists have as much free reign and as much freedom to express pretty much anything that, you know, is not going to have an issue with, say, ad standards or anything like that.
Yeah. And we saw a lot of artwork from yourself, but also obviously the artists that you worked with on this initiative. What was it like, the process, picking and choosing and working with these other Black artists, and how do you kind of go about doing that?
Well, I mean, part of the organizational side of activism is sometimes we overlook the process. So I think activism is about the posters and the banners and those visible, tangible elements. But the organizational side of it, the strategic side of it, is part of the design process as well. And how we design that process lends our skills into other fields like service design or human-centric design. In terms of choosing the artist, my pathway to that was kind of a big reason for why I'm here in the first place. I used to write a blog, and the blog was about culture and design. And I wrote about a designer called John Daniel, who was another British designer. He was a bit older than me, but he wrote an amazing piece in Creative Review about the design work of guys like George Alden and Archie Boston. So I wrote a blog on him, and he got in touch. He actually reached out, he saw it, and we connected. And he introduced me to a whole community of design and art, because at this point, I have been the only Black person working in pretty much any company I've worked at since I was 20 years old. And then suddenly I meet this guy, and he's doing what I'm doing at a high level. He's a bit further ahead than me. And he just kind of introduced me into a whole world that I didn't know existed. He wrote a column for Design Week called Four Corners, where he spoke to artists and designers from the Afro-Caribbean diaspora about their work and used it as a platform. And that's the platform that I used to contact a lot of these artists that were in Black Art. John sadly passed away some years ago, but we all kind of had this shared connection of this one person. And another aspect of design activism, which is so important in terms of moving forward, in terms of building a practice, is relationships. Like, we have to cultivate relationships. It's not enough to just kind of have people that are in our social network or followers or, you know, people we retweet or whatever. We have to cultivate relationships. We have to cultivate these communities. We have to build them from the ground up, because essentially they are our safe space. So a lot of the artists that I met and got involved with for Black Outdoor Art were actually through John, because John had profiled them. So when I contacted them, we kind of had this shared history, though we'd never met. And then by the time I got everybody on board, it's a challenging process. It's a hard thing for people to do, to kind of go, right, you have to sum up how you feel about being Black, British, how you feel about racism, how you feel about diversity, how you feel about equality, how you feel about moving forward, how you feel about your place in it. And because I don't want the conversation to be monolithic, I want it to be varied. So I kind of want people to go to, uncomfortable places. And I found a lot of the work that I had done extremely uncomfortable. One of the pieces I've done kind of visibly upset me when I released it. But I kind of want that reaction, because I kind of feel there's a catharsis to it. So it's kind of getting the guys to getting all the participants to think about the work, not in terms of what they do commercially. So, there was a lot of talk about what the brief was. And I didn't want to make the brief too structured. I didn't want to make it too rigid, because I wanted it to be more about expression, but I kind of wanted it to be an authentic expression. I wanted it to be something that kind of mattered, that people could gravitate towards. But the idea of distilling these notions into one visual or one headline, it's a long process, but I think everybody just did amazing. I think, it's some of the best work that I've seen in my career come from the guys involved in this project.
Wow. It sounds really, really great. And so just to touch on another topic, I just was wondering, can you explain your idea of design for good and social design, and what your process is in working with others in general?
So in terms of design for good, I was kind of introduced to this concept maybe a few years ago. Like I didn't really know it was like a thing. But then as I kind of did more and more kind of advocacy work, and I did more research, I came across an AIGA online course called Design for Good. And I became very familiar with the work of Mark Randall and his agency called World Studio. And what it showed me was that, you can build a viable practice as a designer, whether a freelancer or starting a business, with socially conscious projects. And I think what it comes down to is just kind of using a process and applying that process to how you engage with people, the kinds of clients you engage with, and the value that they have. So I'll share my screen again to kind of give you an example. Oh, that doesn't want that. Try again. So these are the kind of the elements in terms of my own personal take on design for good. There's quite a few different definitions and methodologies out there for kind of how to go about this work or how to bring it into your work. But essentially, the point is to align our career with our values. So how we do that with discovery phase, we're getting inspired, we're exploring our passions, we're trying to figure out what moves us. And then we're going to start looking for trouble. We're going to start local, we're going to try and solve problems, and we're going to come in with this entrepreneurial mindset. And then we're going to pick a fight. We're going to advocate for something. We're going to set our values, and these values are going to guide us. They're going to help us choose our allies. They're going to help us choose clients. And from there, we're going to cultivate relationships, and we're going to try and connect our work at the same time. And after that, oh my God, I've got a typo there. Just ignore that. And then after that, we're going to iterate. So we're going to look at the kind of work we're doing. We're going to observe it. We're going to measure it. We're going to work out how we can improve it or how we need to do it better. And we're going to use this process over and over again in terms of whether it's an individual piece of work or whether we're pitching for a new business, or how we kind of measure the efficacy of what we do.
Right. No, those steps are definitely extremely informative. And so along with the Black Outdoor Art Initiative, you obviously run multiple other projects. What are some of your favorite projects that you've worked on that you haven't already mentioned today?
Oh, my favorite projects. Well, so after I worked at an agency and I became head of creative, I left to start my own studio, and I focused heavily on music projects. So I worked for Universal, Warner's, Polydor, Sony, Capitol, basically all the major record labels in the UK. And a lot of that work I was very, very proud of, based on this very kind of high turnover, very responsive. But essentially what I was trying to do was create value in terms of marketing. So I'm still kind of using this design activism sensibility where I'm looking at marketing as connection. So I'm not looking at it as selling. I'm looking at marketing as storytelling. So I'm looking at it as an opportunity to try and connect with people and kind of deliver value over, what is essentially intended to be a sales communication. But a lot of the projects I did for artists like Black Eyed Peas, for Dre, for Diddy, and this is connecting with the culture that I grew up kind of idolizing. So it's kind of great to be in the mix and to be able to kind of contribute and to really kind of build the work around that. And then it just kind of got to the point where it was like, okay, how do we use these tools for more benefit in our actual community? Like, how do we make this better for the world we live in terms of, Lady Gaga's going to sell, how many records Lady Gaga's going to sell. So if I take my skills away from that, how then can I use it to kind of benefit, or how can I use it to add value, the world we live in, the society we live in, the industry that we work in?
No, definitely understood. So right now we're going to hand over to questions. Anyone has any questions that's participating, please put them in the Q&A section and we'll be answering them. So I've got a question here. So the question is, what advice do you have for your young students of color going into an industry where there aren't many people who look like them? So I guess he's not specifically talking about the maybe graphic design industry, but the creative industry as a whole, or just in general. What advice would you have for someone like that? Because obviously you've touched on your own experience of kind of not seeing yourself represented through graphic, or just when you go into like certain companies. So any advice you would give?
Okay, so activism takes many forms. So what you have to do is you have to decide how you want to work and what pathway you're going to take. So there's social entrepreneurship, which we've talked about. There's role transformation. These are all my terms. They may be different if you check out other sources. There's role transformation, and then there's internal transformation. So to give you an idea of internal transformation, it might be that if you join a company that has very low levels of representation, you become an advocate for that within that company, and you drive that change internally, and you put pressure on your boss or your line manager or your MD, and you kind of go, look, this is my perspective, or this is how it benefits the agency. Can I handle recruitment? I ran a portfolio review session for the agency I worked at for about a year, where I built up we had a roster of freelancers. And the way we were doing it before wasn't really working. So we commissioned and built an intranet, which would hold all of their details. And I was like, okay, I want to meet all these people because I don't want it to just be, a voice at the end of the phone. So I set up a portfolio review where someone would come in every Friday, and I would sit with them for about an hour and we review their work, and we talk about where they were at, where they wanted to be, and whether their mission aligned with where the agency was at. And that's internal transformation. So in terms of activism, you kind of have to set out how you want to, do you want to work within the system, or do you want to work without the system? If you don't want to work within the system, then it's about creating your own space. And then it's about setting up on your own, because that may be the only way you can really find that, because there are very few progressive, creative businesses. There are some, there's a lot more than there was 10 years ago. But again, there's not as many as should, you know, in terms of reflecting the makeup of the United Kingdom. So you kind of have to set your stall out. Do you want to drive internal change, or do you want to drive change separately? Do you want to start up your own shop? Do you want to start up your own business? Do you want to start your own movement? Do you want to create your own network, your own platform? Or do you want to do it within the boundaries of a company?
Okay, great answer. Okay, so you have another questions here. What lessons have you learned from 2020? So I guess the state of the year so far hasn't been the best, and I find myself asking a lot of people, you know, how have you kept the drive to be creative, and how have you found passion and inspiration from being stuck inside, and I guess how have you kind of dealt with that?
I guess it's just kind of framing, essentially. So I've kind of chosen to frame this year as it's hugely disruptive, but with that disruption comes opportunity. Because these are conversations that we weren't having a year ago. These are conversations that, you know, before COVID-19, we weren't even having 6 months before that. So even though we're kind of standing at the precipice of this hugely tumultuous time, the opportunity there is, like, number one, everybody kind of stops for a minute, especially around April, May. And that's the reason that Blackout Tuesday was able to be so impactful. That's the reason Black Lives Matter, BLM UK, was able to be so impactful. That's the reason the protests were able to be so impactful. So it's kind of reframing the moment based on kind of where you see the opportunity. And I know it's not really possible for everybody, especially if you're in the thick of it, or if there's stuff that you're kind of dealing with or that you're struggling with. And all of this stuff that we're talking about has an effect on the people doing it. Like, it has, I'm not going to say necessarily it's traumatic, but it's tough to deal with. And, you know, it's a conversation I've had every single day since May, pretty much. And it informs basically 90% of my work now. So, you know, it's tough going, but I think if we can kind of look for the gaps in what's going on and kind of frame it so that we can kind of take advantage of the moment, and hopefully when we get through this tumultuous time, we're coming through it in a more progressive state. Yeah.
It's definitely a lot of emotional labor taking on what we are at the moment. So yeah, definitely agree. So we have a question here. It's quite a long-winded one. How do you deal with feeling like you won't be able to see real systemic change in your lifetime? Also, I wanted to thank you for mentioning John Daniel, who was a close friend of my dad's, and it was really emotional to hear you speak about him. Oh, that's lovely. So yeah, how do you deal with feeling like you won't be able to see real systemic change within your lifetime, if you do feel like that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough. I mean, you know, we're talking about kind of over 400 years of this pervasive ideology that has shaped our world. It's shaped our world economically, it's shaped our world politically. And the idea that we're kind of going to undo that in 70 years is fairly kind of unfeasible. But however, I kind of feel like it's all just kind of, it's like it's chipping away. How I visualize it is like it's this huge rock. Everybody's just kind of chipping away just one tiny piece at a time. And, you know, my work isn't, you know, I'm not out there like, I don't know, someone like David Olusuga or Akala or any of these guys that are really being like, really like leading the charge. I'm just doing a small part of that. But if I can just kind of take off one chip, and that one chip then inspires maybe, I don't know, a few people on this call to go out and say, okay, how can I affect change? What can I do? What can I make? What poster can I make? What website can I make? What platform can I create? What anything can I create? That then chips away again, and that we just kind of just continue this cycle of just one person inspiring the next, one person inspiring the next. And, you know, we do it all until those chips become a crack. Now, it's probably not going to happen in my lifetime, maybe not in my daughter's lifetime, but there's no other way to move forward. There's absolutely no other way. And yeah, the big love to the friend of John Daniel. He was a hugely influential guy. Before John, I didn't even know that you could do work like this for the community. Like, it was a revelation to me. I'd been in agencies the whole time, and there was this guy who basically was just out in Brixton, out in South London, designing for community centres, designing for events, and everything was about our heritage. Everything was about our culture. He was he's a big-hearted, he's a great guy, and yeah, constant inspiration.
Great. So we have, what are some of the public reactions you've had from a work or piece you've created?
Yeah, so
I'm sorry, and I guess I'm just even myself, you know, have you ever been really shocked or kind of like taken aback by the reaction? Are there any reactions that affect you more than others if people are really kind of, you know, against a message that you're sending out?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some sort of interactions with social media with people who don't agree with the progressive sentiments of some of the work, put mildly. But I kind of welcome it. Like, I'm quite up for to kind of lean into it. I kind of want to hear that discourse, because that's kind of the point. The point is to get these discussions on the table. And, you know, I think we kind of have, there's kind of two ways you can look at approaching these issues that we're dealing with and the racism in the UK. And, you know, both schools of thought are completely valid. One school of thought will say, okay, it's up to everybody else to educate themselves on racism and slavery and what it means, and systemic and institutional racism. It's up to you to do that. You do that work. I don't need to do that work. And there's another school of thought that kind of says, well, you know what? I can't trust you to do that work, or I can't leave it to you to do that work, or I don't want you to get it wrong. I veer more on this side, where I'm just kind of like, you know what, I'm willing to kind of put myself out there. I'm willing to put myself in the firing line to have these discussions. And, you know, I kind of welcome the negative side of it, because if it was all positive, it wouldn't be working. And part of how we need to understand marketing and not view it in terms of selling, but view it in terms of connection. Like, if it's not making a noise, if your work is not ticking people off, you're probably not trying hard enough. So disruption is a key part of being a design activist, where especially, well, more so on the visual side, maybe less so on the organizational side, but in terms of trying to make a splash or trying to make a statement, we kind of want that disruption. We kind of want that, the good energy and the negative energy, because until we see the negative energy, we can't do anything about it. We can't have those discussions, we can't have those arguments. And 9 times out of 10, the arguments go absolutely nowhere, but they need to be out there. Because part of the problem with the UK is its own inability to reckon with its imperialist, colonialist, racist past. And that makes any progression very hard. When most people don't believe there's a problem, then it's very hard to deal with the problem. And not to say that all people in the UK feel one way, but it's just to kind of say, until we can understand that, you know, Britain had a huge role in the transatlantic slave trade, that Britain has an imperialist past, that Britain has a colonial past, until we can discuss that, talk about it, and why it impacts us even today, we can't move forward. So, you know, I kind of welcome all that smoke.
You can take all the smoke. I have a few here about the criticism. So it's just kind of asking, you know, has the criticism been beneficial, or has the public reaction to your work, has it made you happy? Like, yes, you want it, but when you get it, do you kind of like take it on board? Or do you just kind of like, yes, I'm glad the conversation's going, but kind of let it out? But I also think about how your name is also attached to your work. So it's not like you're kind of behind a brand or company where if you do something quite controversial, the brands get hit with it. I could understand how like people might not like the work, but then they also might have a problem with you personally, because your name is literally attached to everything. So how do you deal with stuff like that?
I'm pretty good at kind of taking it on the chin. There's conversations that are worth having, and there's conversations that aren't worth having. So again, we need to set our values out at the start as to how we're going to engage, what's important, what matters. Now, if somebody leaves a racist comment on one of my Twitter posts, like that's nothing to me. That's not doing anything. So I'm not interested in that. Like, that's just, just block him, delete him, it doesn't matter, because I'm not going to change their mind, and there's no impact from that. That doesn't benefit my community in any way. For me to have, you know, a knockdown Twitter fight, which I've had, and, you know, it's kind of, you get your points in, but then where's the change? So if everything is looking at the change, everything is driven by, you know, what our goals are, what our objectives are. To go back to my quote from earlier, the purpose of all we make, whether big or small, strategic or aesthetic, is to change detrimental value systems that affect everyone's well-being. So if I kind of use that as my my kind of thread of steel, as it were, it kind of dictates what I can or what I should engage with or what I shouldn't engage with. Now, if somebody wants to have a legitimate discussion about whether something's appropriate, for example, we've had a lot of conversations around Black History Month and what's appropriate for brands to say or do and how they should act. Those are constructive conversations. I'm happy to dive in there, even if people don't agree with me. The point isn't to get everybody to agree with me. The point is to have the discussion. So as long as the quality of the discussion is worth having, then I'm absolutely fine with it. If it's people leaving like hateful messages, it doesn't, it's water for ducks back. So yeah, it's just about the quality of the engagement.
Okay. And we have about 3 minutes left, so I've just got time for one more question. So I've got this question: how can up and coming artists / activists find mentors to support us, people who look like us, and get where we are coming from when we start the university process, which doesn't reflect us? So yeah, how can, I know you said you kind of in a way mentor some people and kind of like talk about the process. So do you have any idea where someone now could find that type of mentorship and support?
So the thing about mentors is they're very hard to find. And as the marketer Seth Godin said, they don't scale. So they're very few and far between. And, you know, typically they can't serve, you know, like 10,000 people. So obviously your goal is to kind of look for people who are doing the kind of work that you want to do. Find them and engage with them, because most people, especially if it's people in my position or from my background, are going to be more than willing to help. I've participated in mentoring groups and all of that as well. And it's beneficial to us too, because it helps us grow. And that perspective enriches our work. So if you can't find a mentor, then you kind of need to do the next best thing. The next best thing is essentially either networking groups or the kinds of materials, the books you're reading. So try and find people that are leading lights in the field that you want to be in, and try and get into their content. Whether they have a blog, whether they have a book, whether they have a novel, reach out to them. As something that I was told many years ago is like, you'd be surprised at how many famous authors or directors or whatever are happy to speak to people, especially people who are coming through a similar pathway as them. And, you know, they're more than happy to help. But there are lots of advocacy groups in Facebook. There's a ton of platforms that have popped up since Black Lives Matter in this country. And they're all out there. And it's just a matter of just reaching out to people, speaking to people, reaching out, speaking to people. And it's tough because, especially in terms of university, the pathway for a person of color might not necessarily be the same for everybody else. And that's something that I learned. I had no idea. So I kind of went out just kind of trying to figure it out and just stumbling for a really long time before I kind of found my feet. And I didn't have mentors, and I couldn't find anybody that was able to take me to that next level. Whereas now you are connected to basically everybody in the world with a device in your pocket. So it's just going to be a case of seeking out those platforms. There's several that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of Facebook groups, and just going on there, stating what you're after, asking for help, and kind of just going through that process over and over.
So just being basically proactive in looking for mentorship yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the etymology of activism is the word active. So everything we do as activists has to be proactive. Yeah. It can't be static. We can't wait for things to come. We have to try it and create stuff. And it may even be to the point where, if you're looking at kind of activism from an organizational perspective, if you can't find any mentors, then maybe you need to do something about that. maybe you need to start a mentoring group, or maybe you need to suggest it, or maybe you need to club together with a bunch of people and say, look, we're going to get together, I don't know, £250. Let's get this person to come and speak to us for 3 hours and we'll pay them. And so there's kind of other ways to approach solving that problem as well.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah, come in and mentor yourself. That's a really good idea. Thank you so much, Greg, for speaking to us, and thank you everyone for participating. You can find Greg on Instagram at Greg Bunbury if you want to keep up to date with what he's doing. And this recording will be available on the RSSU YouTube page shortly, so do keep an eye out for that. And I just would really appreciate if you could fill out a feedback form that we put in the chat. It would really help us continue to do these kind of talks. And thank you all for attending. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.